So I want to start off by saying welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. If you're a fanatic of everything entertainment, then this is the channel for you. But in today's movie review, we'll be talking about 2005's The Crow, Wicked Prayer. So let's get into it. So going into this film, a lot of people warned me about this film, saying it's the worst in the franchise, it is irredeemable, you're gonna hate it. So much so, when I talked about the upcoming release of The Crow on 4K, Andrew Kavanaugh from Kavanaugh's Corner warned me not to watch this. I did it anyway. I'm sorry. But yeah, a lot of people said this is the worst in the franchise. I can totally get it, but I think another film is the worst in the franchise so far. This is really bad, don't get me wrong, but I think I like it a little bit more than most people do. So let's get into it. So let's get into the positives with this film. I think the relationship between our leads in here, played by Edward Furlong, and then I don't remember her name, but she plays in the original Wrong Turn. I'm a fan of her. I'm a fan of both of these actors. It's my favorite relationship in any of the sequels, not the first, because can't really touch that, even though they don't really get into too much. They only show certain flashbacks. But I like that you get to know Edward Furlong's character a little bit more and his fiance. Like the first 15, 20 minutes is like just them. Like that's something you didn't really get out of the other films, which I really respect that. I thought that was a really cool aspect to bring to this film. And I was like, oh, okay, this movie's not as bad as most people bring up. We'll get into that later. While you don't completely buy into the relationship, like the girl from Wrong Turn, you really think she's going to get with that Edward Furlong? Like maybe previously, but no. But you still sort of buy it, even though you don't. The ending I thought was really nice. Not the battle or action sequence, but like them getting back together I thought was really nice and is one of my favorite parts about this film. Some of the side actors in here I thought was really well done. Especially with the fiance's brother, I thought that he did really good in here. Some of the other side characters do great in here as well. Like Danny Trejo shows up. I thought he did okay in here. But some of the side characters in here were really good, but not everyone. We'll get into that later. I just wanted to bring up a couple people that I was a fan of in here. So with that being said, let's get into the mixed aspects with this film. Edward Furlong's performance as the Crow. It would be in the negatives, but I did find it a bit serviceable. I did find it on par with like Vincent Perez in here. Some people might highly prefer Vincent Perez over Edward Furlong, but he did serviceable in here. But there are times in here where his face, he's trying to like act tough and his face is like, and I'm like, bro, I can't take you seriously. You're making me laugh. But other times I think he did okay. Some people put him in the negatives. I found him to be okay. So that being said, let's move on to the negatives with this film, because I do have quite a bit of negatives. The pacing in here. Once again, I think this movie is like I think it's like an hour 30 something, hour 40 something. Could have been trimmed by another 10 to 15 minutes, sort of like Salvation. And they could have trimmed like 10, 15 minutes off of City of Angels too, even though that movie was like 85 minutes or somewhere in there. This one's longer than City of Angels. But after he puts on the makeup, was just a bit too much, a little bit fast paced for me. Actually, it was just a bit all over the place, to be honest. The setting in here, it is unique, I'll give it that, but it just doesn't feel like The Crow. I don't remember if it's New Mexico, Mexico, Texas, or Arizona. One of the dry states in here. It just didn't really feel right, because once you think of The Crow, you think of like a dark city. No pun intended because of Alex Proyas, but you think of this dark ambient city. It just has that vibe and aesthetic. There is no vibe or aesthetic with this film. The setting's unique, but it just didn't really bring anything to the table. The action sequences in here were the choreography in here, the way they shot everything was atrocious. You could tell, I don't remember if this was straight to DVD or straight to sci-fi or whatever it was. You could tell, a lot of those films have those type of action sequences in here. I can't really get into it. It's really, really bad. The videography in here during those scenes is horrible. The choreography is horrible. I wasn't a fan of it at all. There's not even one that I was a fan of. I can't even think of one that even stands out either. I think the worst part about this film is the villains. I don't know. Okay, the betrayals by some of these actors was the way that some of these people act in here was the way that I thought Edward Furlong was going to act in here. Very over the top and Too much nonsense. Very, very, what's the word? Unnecessary. You got Dennis Hopper in here. I get it. He seems like he's having fun in the role, but no. Tara Reid in here. She has a bit of an arc in here where she's like turns into villain to semi anti-hero to the good side. Still goes to prison, but she deserves it. But she was horrible in here too. You had the dude from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't know what his name is. I think he either gave the worst or second worst performance in this film. It's between him and Dennis Hopper and Tara Reid. They were all horrible in here. And then the side villains in here, they're nothing memorable either. I can't even think of a good one. And speaking of the main villains in here, their line deliveries in here is some of the worst in the franchise. Or actually, it is the worst in the franchise, especially with Dennis Hopper. Just the main three that you think of. Dennis Hopper, the dude from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Tara Reid. Their acting and their line deliveries, never again, please. Like, I don't want to watch this film again because of them. Even though this film was released in 2005, I think this film had some of the worst CGI in the franchise. And that's saying a lot because 1993, they had to work around the death of Brandon Lee. And while at times it was very, very noticeable, I think they did really great with what they were given. But this, 12 years later, 11 years later, what were they thinking? It is atrocious, horrible. Why? And the ending fight sequence in here is very unmemorable, except for one aspect. The fact that this film goes from night to day within a matter of like 30 to 45 seconds. What the fuck? And then, finally, the dude from Buffy the Vampire Slayer getting stabbed, if I remember correctly, or whatever it was. Deservedly so, but very unmemorable. And I can't even remember it that well. Like, that's weird. Like, I watched this movie a week ago, and I can't even remember fully what happened throughout it. That's saying something. It's that bad. And then another thing that I thought was really unnecessary, but I don't know why it was in here. I guess to make us hate the villains even more. But there's a lot of racism in here towards the natives. And every time that happened, I rolled my eyes at it. And I'm like, that's not necessary. You could have just had hatred for them without bringing race into it. But whatever. But with that said, this is not my least favorite in the franchise. It comes this close to being my least favorite. I hate City of Angels even more, but this one made me laugh. But I think if this one was so bad it's good in certain scenes, so that's why I prefer this one slightly, which is why I'm going to be giving The Crow Wicked Prayer an overall grade of a 34%. This, once again, is one of the worst movies that I've had to talk about on my channel, but I did get some enjoyment out of it, a bit more than City of Angels. Like, technically, yes, this movie is the worst, but with enjoyment, slightly better than City of Angels for me. But let me know in the comments below what you think about this film. But as always, I just want to say thank you for watching my videos and hope to see you in the next one.